Live in beautiful downtown Boston, this is the Jeff Santos Show.
34 minutes past the hour. It is the Jeff Santos Show. We'll do more on the Clinton, Sanders, and now potentially Biden race with David Paleologos at 5:10. The Suffolk University pollster polls for USA Today as well, and get his thoughts about what would mean. More and more information today coming out about Joe Biden, and some negative news about how this whole thing is coming out with his son asking him to run, and what that means, and whether Joe Biden himself, according to Politico, I consider the source. I mean, Politico is pretty much a place where a lot of op research goes, and that's where they get a lot of their stuff. So we'll see what happens. But we'll start our show today with our guest that is out in Seattle, Washington, of course, with our good friend, a great journalist, and regular here on the show, our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield joins us. How you doing, sir?
Good, Jeff. The news cycle has slowed down a little bit, although we had that tragedy in Oregon, so definitely been the talk of the town in Seattle as well, especially this issue of gun control.
Well, I want to talk to you about what impact it has had in the Pacific Northwest and Seattle, of course, not far from the Oregon border, and even though Roseburg is further in the middle of the state, to the eastern part of the state of Oregon. Tell me a little bit about the reaction over the last 72, 96 hours in the Seattle metropolitan area.
Well, there's a major editorial in the Seattle Times today about this issue, and there's been ongoing coverage in most of the local media up here. There's some questions about Washington State as well in terms of these so-called gun-free zones on campus, because from what I understand, the state law says in Washington State, you actually are legally allowed to carry a concealed weapon onto a public school campus if you were there to, say, pick up a child or drop one off, and you happen to have a permit to carry a concealed weapon. Yes, according to one of the exemptions in our state law, you are allowed to actually, carry that concealed weapon onto a public campus. So it's caused a lot of questions about where to go with this issue of gun control. Washington State has got a lot of rural areas, a lot of very heavily forested woodlands with elk and deer and all sorts of other game. So hunting is a very popular sport in the Northwest, especially on the east side of the mountains, where there tends to be pretty heavy support for the National Rifle Association. The eastern side of Washington is similar in some ways to the eastern side of Oregon. Once you pass the Cascade Mountains and head east, not only is it a different climate environmentally, it's a lot more dry, like a semi-arid desert sort of area with northern forests, but it's also different in terms of its political climate.
Right. Get into that a little bit, because we're talking, of course, with Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show, a regular Tuesday segment with him. So you have a city like Spokane, which is, not a small city, but yet you have a lot of rural areas. And the gun culture, which we see all across the West, is a big issue. People, have the concealed carry issue that, that goes everywhere, including here in the eastern part of the country, particularly down south. Talk to me about, and I think we saw a little bit of this in Colorado, where Columbine and Aurora, where you saw a lot of people who, Denver was a small cowboy town for a long time, and it's now become a very diverse, very progressive city. And I wonder if we are seeing sort of this idea where I believe the shooter was from California and moved from Los Angeles, where her mother was, talking about, a city of violence and so forth, and moved her kid there, but it was a gun addict and so forth. Talk to me about, for the rest of the country that doesn't understand that and that thinks that Oregon is this one big liberal state, that it really isn't, and there's a dividing line there, and maybe how this contributed to this massacre.
Oregon is one of those states where there's supposedly gun-free zones on campus, but according to an appeals court decision, a concealed weapon is legal on campus in Oregon, as well as in Colorado and Idaho, Mississippi, Utah, Wisconsin, and then Texas is actually changing their laws as of next August to do the same thing, to make concealed weapons allowed if you have a concealed weapons permit on these campuses. But Oregon is a very wilderness kind of area in a lot of places. So, I mean, there are definitely some mountaineers who live way out in the woods and probably feel the need to have a gun. It's a very serious issue in both states because you do have this divide. And I think, Portland might be a lot more like Seattle in that when the Seattle Police Department had a gun buyback program a couple of years ago, they immediately received scores and scores of weapons, including a rocket launch, too, without the rocket, luckily. But people in Seattle were more than willing to give away their guns. They thought it was a great deal to collect money from the police department for their old weapons. However, you may not find that in the rural areas of Oregon and Washington. In southwest Washington and in northern and eastern Oregon, there are places where people consider guns to be a part of their culture, very much so. They grew up around guns. They went hunting with their father when they were kids, and maybe still continue that practice in some areas. And so it's a tradition. And so when it comes to gun control, it's no wonder that you have these concealed weapon laws that allow people to carry them pretty much anywhere under certain exemptions. It's a very different culture. I think there is a cultural divide going on in Oregon, and just like in the rest of the country over this issue, and it's a very divisive politically at this point. But the metropolitan areas like Portland and Seattle tend to have a lower crime rate in comparison to cities in the rest of the country. So you don't find quite as much of what some might call the gun craziness going on. It's mostly liberal areas where people do believe in some kind of, at least, limited gun control, so that there's some kind of sanity behind the policy. I know background checks and those kinds of issues have been serious issues in Washington State as well as in Oregon. And I'm sure the debate will continue. This has really heated up the debate. It's a really terrible, sad day for the Northwest, and people are still talking about it daily as if it just happened yesterday, Jeff. It really had an effect on people up here.
Well, I tell you, it's so sad, and we hopefully will move. President Obama, I know, is going out there into the week, and I want to get your thoughts about how this is affecting the support of Senator Sanders. Again, he did get a D- from the NRA. This is no lover of guns, Senator Sanders. I want to get your thoughts on that. But just one more thing on the issue that I think is important here is that Canada, all of a sudden, just because you get across the line north of Montana or in British Columbia, they have a very similar situation. So you all know, being in Seattle, the whole idea of Cascadia, British Columbia, Oregon, and Washington State. I mean, what do they do up there? I mean, they obviously have similar scenarios. Further east you go, towards Alberta and so forth, they have to have a similar philosophy. But they don't have anywhere near the problem of guns that we do.
I just don't think that it's a part of the Canadian culture the way it is the American culture. I don't know if it comes from the wild, wild west, the frontier days, but there was a very interesting episode of TV Nation that Michael Moore put together where he actually stacked rifles on each side of the border. And this was near in Michigan, I guess, north of Detroit. But what happened was on the American side, he gave away those weapons within 10 minutes, and on the Canadian side, even though they had a free sign hanging on them, they just sort of sat there all day. So I think it's just the culture is different. It's a little less violent in some respects, and I think that people don't have the same attachment or obsession with guns that a lot of Americans do across the border in Canada.
Well, there's no doubt about the obsession, but they're somehow doing the right thing. Common sense gun laws. We're right back with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield. It's the hour. It is the Jeff Santos Show that you're tuned into. Talking with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the program. Mark, we had this controversy after, if you want to call it that, between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. I think, from my perspective, I like what I heard from Hillary Clinton in terms of her issues of gun control, as I have heard from Barack Obama. Republicans have stopped it. Now, Bernie Sanders, had voted not to sue the gun manufacturers in '05. I would disagree with that. But, again, a D-. Just wondering what you've heard from those who are Sanders supporters, including many of the folks that you talk to a lot in the progressive community there, if this has changed anything.
Not really. It hasn't been one of the hot-button issues that people have been talking about in terms of Bernie Sanders. There might be actually more criticism in this area amongst progressives for some of his support of Israel. But the issue of gun control, he is obviously not an NRA member, and they don't like him very much at all. And then recently he has moved away from some of his previous positions on this issue. But he does come from Vermont, which is another area of the country where there's a lot of forest and mountain undeveloped land where there are hunters and people actually living out in cabins, in the wilderness. So he comes from a state where guns are traditionally a part of the culture as well. And I think some of the criticism originally came from his objections to the Brady Bill. But he explained, that his issue with that bill was actually the inclusion of the mandatory waiting period for gun purchases. It wasn't the background checks that he was against. So he is taken on this issue in a way that's not necessarily, I guess, a knee-jerk reaction, but at the same time, he really understands the mood of the country. And people are very worried about this issue. It's constantly in the news lately. And there's so many, there have actually been some shootings in Washington State as well. So we've seen these same kinds of things all across the country. And I think he's moving to the mood of the nation, which is, let's do something about this issue. And I think, you could say that he is a proponent of reasonable gun control. So I don't think it's going to hurt him, either in terms of support from progressives, and I don't think it's hurt him in terms of his social and economic policies, because that's really why people love Bernie Sanders across the country. It's about the economics. And his latest video actually about the economic inequality in the country is pretty amazing. If you really think about the billions and billions of dollars that are being made by the top 1%, as opposed to basically stagnant wages, loss of benefits, and outsourcing of a lot of the middle class folks around the country. He definitely talks about the disappearing middle class in America, and that's something I think that appeals to all political spectrums, whether you're Republican or Democrat or Libertarian. I think understand that there's an economic crisis in the United States, and the good middle class jobs, a lot of them are gone.
No doubt about that. And he's been the one champion. You got people like Sherrod Brown and Elizabeth Warren, but for the most part, Bernie Sanders has been there, and that's why a lot of people, including myself, are out there, talking about his message. Even if you disagree with him on one and two messages. One of the people who has endorsed Bernie Sanders is in the city council fight. Talk to me about that. That is an issue that you've been writing about personally, right?
Yes, actually, Kshama Sawant has gained an international reputation. She gets press media from all over the world, especially India, of course. But she got her economics PhD at North Carolina State University, and now she became an educator in Seattle. Now she is a city council member, and her first campaign won largely on the $15 an hour minimum wage issue. She was actually arrested outside of the Alaska Airlines headquarters at SeaTac Airport when she was protesting the fact that SeaTac International Airport refused to go along with SeaTac Washington's $15 an hour minimum wage law, which was the first in the country. So she's been very successful on that issue. It's now spread across the country and become a national movement at 15now.org. And you also have movements in New York, Los Angeles, and the airport workers in San Francisco, New Orleans, and Boston are all working for this increase in their minimum wage. Now, Kshama Sawant is running on the issue of rent control. And I have heard that slogan repeated often in Seattle that originally came from New York, which is the rents are just too damn high.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. That was really great. It is really true. The rents are just too damn high. Not only in New York, but Seattle, Boston, San Francisco. You can go into some of the most desirable cities, and the rent is too damn high.
Yeah, apparently in Boston and Jamaica Plain, Chinatown, and South Boston, it's a real issue, the same issue that we're dealing with in Seattle, which is real estate development, which increases the real estate prices, and then the poor and working class folks have to leave the neighborhood. So that's been happening all across Seattle and in outlying areas. Well, she's running on this issue now, and the state of Washington has prohibited rent control on a local level. So it's actually in the hands of the state legislature. But she's still talking about ways of alleviating this problem and creating affordable housing in Seattle. She's running against a candidate who's basically represented herself as, I'm not Kshama Sawant, and that's Pamela Banks. And Banks has accused Sawant of grandstanding, of being more concerned with her international reputation as a socialist alternative candidate than really caring about what's happening at the city council. She's also accused Sawant of refusing to negotiate with the other members of the council. Ever since she was elected, she's worked pretty closely with the most progressive city council members, Nick Licata and Mike O'Brien. But